Welcome to our new program, The False Trends of Fatima, with the special guest, the author of the book, False Trends of Fatima. Welcome to our program, Chris.
Thanks for having me back, Father. This is a complicated subject, but I think we're making headway here.
And in the last program, we talked about the 1982 and then the 1984 consecration of the world. And of course, there are those people, the False Trends of Fatima, keep saying that the 1984 consecration of the world was a fulfillment of Our Lady's request for the consecration of Russia.
Right.
Now, some people say that it's just you're my opinion. We're calling anyone else who doesn't agree with us False Trends of Fatima. But we actually have the Pope, what he said in 1984. He said it very clearly. Perhaps you'd like to tell us. We have it, first of all, in the Observatory Romano, and I'm sure they can get a close shot of this, but there's the Observatory Romano from March 26th, the day after the consecration. Here you see a picture of the Pope on his knees consecrating the world. And here we have the words that he added in. This is a blow-up from the this actually is a transfer from page 6, but this is the actual text from the Observatory Romano. And in there, the Pope says, Lumina specialmente I popoli di cui tu aspetti la nostra consecrazione e il nostro affidamento.
Enlighten especially the peoples whose consecration and entrustment by us you are awaiting. Why would he say that during?
During this consecration, when he said, well, you're still waiting for it after he says it. And then, if that wasn't clear enough, in the same Observatory Romano on March 26th, 27th, inside the magazine, he's got this other article, which is Maria aiutici a inaugurare il mondo nuovo, perché il vecchio è ingiusto, ci opprime e fa paura. Mary, please help us to start a new world, which is the old, because the old one is unjust and oppresses us and makes us afraid. And this text here is what the Pope addressed to Our Lady at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Again, and it's all in Italian, but I can read the translate as I go.
I'll help you here. I have it right here.
Okay.
We wish to choose this Sunday for the act of entrusting and consecration of the world of all peoples, especially those who have a very great need of this consecration and entrustment, of those people for whom you yourself are awaiting our act of consecration. This was several hours after the ceremony in 1984. Inside St. Peter's built the basilica in front of about 10,000 witnesses.
He then goes on to say that we have done everything we could do. So somehow or other, the Pope was impeded, and he's saying that I was impeded fulfilling what you asked me to do. Tutto questo abbiamo potuto fare secondo il nostro, according to our poor human possibilities, in the dimension of our human weakness. So something in his human weakness prevented him from doing the consecration of Russia, and he admits it in the afternoon, 4 hours after he did the consecration of the world.
Now, you might say, if you're a skeptic, well, what is your proof that John Paul II really wanted to consecrate Russia, but that he was dissuaded from doing so? And again, this effort to dissuade him from doing so would be part of this party line we talked about. Russia cannot be consecrated because the new orientation of the Church, the openness to the world, ecumenism, the Vatican-Moscow Agreement, Ostpolitik, the politic of the East, cozying up to communist regimes, seeking to placate them instead of confronting them like before. All of this is antithetical to the consecration of Russia. So we're saying the Pope was talked out of it according to the party line. Well, here's some proof that that's exactly what happened. Bishop Cordes, Joseph Cordes, is quoted as follows.
He was a Vatican official. I think he was in charge of the Vatican City State, if I recall.
I recall, referring to John Paul II, that the Pope thought sometime before the consecration of mentioning Russia in the prayer of benediction. But at the suggestion of his collaborators, he abandoned the idea. He could not risk such a direct provocation of the Soviet leader. The Pope also decided not to mention Russia directly out of sensitivity to the Orthodox bishops he had invited to join in the consecration prayer, which is news to me. So for good reasons, he followed the discreet approach of Pope Pius XII and of the bishops at the Second Vatican Council, where he himself was very prominent. Well, let's unpack that. There's a lot of stuff in there. First of all, Cordes admits that at the suggestion of his collaborators, including the Secretary of State, John Paul II abandoned the idea of mentioning Russia in the consecration of Russia, which in itself is ludicrous.
So how can you consecrate a country if you deliberately exclude mentioning the country in the first place?
Now, the reason given is that he decided to do this out of sensitivity to the Orthodox bishops he had invited to join in the consecration prayer. Now, You can talk about this in a minute, but I see an absurdity implicit in this as well. He didn't want to consecrate Russia by name because it would offend the Orthodox bishops, who should not think that Russia is being consecrated. Yet we're told this was the consecration of Russia, in which he invited the Orthodox bishops to participate.
Yes.
So that what were they being told? Well, we're really not consecrating Russia, even though we're going to tell everyone else afterwards, wink, wink, that this was the consecration of Russia. It's absolutely ridiculous. And then it says, for good reasons, he, meaning John Paul II, followed the discreet approach of Pius XII, which is not true because in his apostolic exhortation he did mention Russia by
Well, in
name.
fact, in 952, Pius XII, on July 7th, 952, consecrated Russia by name. But what he didn't do was have the bishops join him, because he didn't even know he was supposed to have the bishops join him, according to at least some Fatima scholars. He didn't even know, because, again, falsifying the message, and you falsify it, and the Pope gets false information, then the Pope doesn't do what he's supposed to do.
Yes, right. And according to this quote by Cordes, this discreet approach of not mentioning Russia in the consecration of Russia, which is an oxymoron, was also followed by the bishops at the Second Vatican Council, where he himself, meaning John Paul II, was prominent. Apparently there was some sort of consecration at the Second Vatican Council.
Well, what happened there, this again, you had all the bishops, or almost all the bishops, present at the closing session on November 21st, 1963, in which Paul VI read a consecration of the world. The bishops did not join; they just witnessed this consecration of the world. I mean, they could have even at least tried to make it a consecration of the world with all the bishops, which would have been better than just by the Pope himself.
Well, of course,
but the bishops were not even invited to join.
Right.
But they were there, present,
sitting there mute.
Yes.
Just as they were mute about world communism and Soviet communism. So this discreet approach, as Cordes calls it, of refusing to mention Russia in the consecration of Russia, which is utterly laughable.
And refusing to have the bishops join in when the bishops are right there, they could have joined in.
Well, yeah, and this discreet approach is right in line with the Vatican-Moscow Agreement, during which the same Second Vatican Council observed a studious silence about the very existence of Russian Soviet communism. So this is the party line in action from the time of the Second Vatican Council moving forward. And in fact, in 1984, we find this statement from the U.S. President of the Blue Army at the time, Bishop Hastrich. And they're already trying to sanitize the message of Fatima by diverting people away from the consecration of Russia. And according to Hastrich, speaking in 1984, perfectly in line with the party line, quote, "We are rather to pray that members of the Blue Army would so pray and fast," this is the prayer and fasting theme, "that they themselves might be thoroughly converted. To pray for the conversion," he puts this in contemptuous quotes, "the conversion of Russia may seem like waving a red flag in front of a bull. So it might be more prudent to pray for peace in the world." More prudent, he says. And why is it more prudent? Well, here we have the smoking gun. We might pray explicitly for Russia if we wish to do so. But in our public message, we should avoid upsetting the delicate balance of international affairs which the Holy See is trying so hard to control and direct, end quote, meaning the Secretary of State, because international affairs of the Vatican are conducted by the Secretary of State. Secretary of State coordinates the ambassadorial outreach of the Holy See with the various papal nuncios. So here is an open admission by the President of the Blue Army that we, the Blue Army, which is supposed to be dedicated
to Our Lady
the
of Fatima,
consecration of Russia, will not mention Russia any further in public because of the diplomatic efforts of the Vatican Secretary of State.
So it's the subjection of Our Lady and her message to the Secretary of State, to the party line, but while all the time pretending to be friendly towards Our Lady, friendly towards the message of Fatima, but in fact they are suppressing the real message, as that part of it, and they're suppressing the request.
Now, another aspect of this party line, which emanates from the Vatican-Moscow Agreement, is that, of course, we can't condemn any communist regime. We can't condemn, therefore, the Red Chinese regime, which is a direct outgrowth of the errors of Russia. Soviet communism spread to China, and communist China would not have come into existence if not for the spread of Russia's errors. But the Vatican policy toward communist China is, as with the Kremlin, one of appeasement, and silence about the oppression of Catholics who live in the underground church and are oppressed by the Beijing regime. We observe a studious silence concerning that as well. We say nothing about the persecution. And also we legitimate, meaning the Vatican apparatus, the so-called Chinese Patriotic Association, which is the pseudo-church that the Chinese government has created to replace the true Catholic Church in China. And as a result, we have an underground church and the so-called official Chinese church, which the Vatican, operating through the Secretary of State, coddles. Now, here's what Cardinal Zen has said about this policy.
Cardinal Zen is the former Archbishop of Hong Kong.
Right. Here's what
and a cardinal still alive today.
Yes. Here's what he says about the Vatican's policy, which is the policy of the Secretary of State. He refers to a letter to Chinese Catholics in which Cardinal Bertone, the Secretary of State, argues for careful efforts to cooperate with the official church, meaning the church imposed on the true Catholics by the Chinese regime, which dares to tell Catholics who their bishops will be, and arranges for consecrations, episcopal consecrations, without papal approval.
Well, and we should really explain it's schismatic in its very foundation, because
Absolutely.
There's a Catholic faithful underground. They're underground because they're persecuted, and so in order to get Catholics to be confused and to follow a false Catholic Church, they get something looking like the Catholic Church. They have bishops looking like Catholic bishops. They have their vestments. They have their ceremonies. They have everything else, and they say almost many things which are Catholic. But in principle, they say, but we will not. The Catholic Patriotic Association will not accept the leadership or obedience to the Pope. By definition, that's what we will. That's what defines us, and that's schismatic and it's heretical.
And Cardinal Zen attributes this Vatican policy of appeasing the Chinese government, cozying up to the phony Patriotic Association, which is a pseudo-schismatic church. Here's what he says. He says it results from, quote, the old Ostpolitik. The Vatican-Moscow Agreement manifests itself in Ostpolitik, Eastpolitik, the politics of the East. You deal with these communist regimes
by appeasing them.
By appeasing them. And
even when they directly contradict Catholic doctrine and pretend to be a church that is the true Catholic Church, and you won't even say, no, they're not the true ones, they're the false ones.
So now he says of the situation of the underground Catholics in China, this policy of Ostpolitik, which is compromise at any cost to please the government always, to always avoid confrontation, led to the present situation. End quote. In other words, because the church did not stand up to communism in China, the underground church is persecuted today and will continue to be persecuted as long as this Vatican Secretary of State party line persists.
You see, it's with Casiroli, it's with Sodano, it's with Bertone. And even though Cardinal Bertone and Cardinal Zen are both members of the same religious order, obviously Cardinal Zen has not been taken in by Cardinal Bertone.
No, and he's quite courageous to stand up to the Secretary of State because he recognizes something that perhaps we should discuss now. He recognizes that the Vatican Secretary of State is not part of the divine constitution of the Church and, in fact, has no pastoral authority, is not the shepherd of a single solitary soul in the 1 billion member Catholic Church. The Vatican Secretary of State is a functionary of the Vatican city-state and has no authority to command Catholics to do anything in the field of faith and morals. So what authority does he have over the message of Fatima, Father?
But yeah, you see there was Cardinal Sodano who actually appeared to command Cardinal Ratzinger when they presented the the partial third secret. He says, following Cardinal Sodano, as Cardinal Sodano said, Cardinal Ratzinger said, and we must do what follow Cardinal. So he has power. I don't say he has legitimate authority, but he has power to command all the other people, including the man in charge of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith.
But where did he get this power? Isn't this a problem that has afflicted the Church since the Second Vatican Council? The problem of false obedience. People demanding obedience who really have no authority to require obedience.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I mean, I'm sort of subject to that myself with the one cardinal at the time. I've got these lawsuits still against these cardinals who abuse their authority to the Pope. I followed all due canonical course. Of course, apparently law itself is suppressed when you get to these points because the Cardinal Secretary of State is too powerful even for the Pope to fulfill his duties. But the law himself, the law that the Pope, John Paul II, promulgated, he did not follow in my case, because he's had to hear my case. Because after you give it 2-3 times in due course, the Pope is deemed to have taken the case, and he has to hear it. And it's actually defined by the Church, defined by the Council of Leon and the Council of First Vatican Council of the Pope. You can appeal directly to the Pope, which is what I did. However, having said that, we see the same thing here, that that it's the Secretary of State, is whatever he wants is what happens, not even though he hasn't got authority for it. And the commanding of stuff that they don't have authority for is an abuse of authority.
And yet this usurpation of authority has continued throughout the post-conciliar period in the Church, for example.
Well, you saw in the whole Mass, not Mass.
Yeah, the foremost example of that is this false impression which arose.
It didn't just arise; it was actually imposed on the Church. Yeah, you have the Congregation for Liturgy. They've changed their name so many times I can't keep up with them. But the congregations deliberately gave the impression that you cannot celebrate, you cannot attend the old Mass. Now, reason why we can use that example, Chris, as I'm sure you know very well, is that in fact Pope Benedict XVI himself, you could tell from the documents, but here he is on the 7th of July 2007. He says to the whole world, to the Catholic Church, says, the old Mass was never forbidden, but for 40 years that impression was carried on by the Secretary of State and by the Liturgy Commission and so forth. And so even to this day, there are Catholics who think, well, because I say the Latin Mass, I'm not being obedient. No, I'm following what the law permits, allows, and encourages me to do. I'm not the only one, of course, but yet you're disobedient. You're not outside the Church because you're not saying the new Mass. In fact, but at least we can thank Pope Benedict XVI for finally clarifying that since 1969, 79, 89, 99, 2009, almost 40 years, 38 years before it was clarified by the Pope himself.
Yeah, and he clarified it in Summorum Pontificum, the motu proprio, in which he says that the traditional Latin Mass, last codified in the 1962 Missal, was never abrogated. Never abrogated.
You have to explain what the word abrogated means.
Abolished by law. And he also says in the letter to the world's bishops accompanying his motu proprio that the traditional Latin Mass, and I'm quoting verbatim, was never juridically abrogated and was in principle always permitted. Always permitted.
Of course.
And we were told for 40 years that it was forbidden by people who purported to exercise authority in the matter. Yeah. Vatican bureaucrats.
So that's why it's important obedience is a virtue that God is very pleased with, but to give obedience to a false teaching or to a false ruling is actually not disobeying God. There's those who point out that the old Mass could not be forbidden by dogmatic decree of the Council of Trent. And so for people to say that, and we must adhere to the rights passed on to us from the previous generation. The new right has not been passed on from the previous generation. It's a made-up thing. We're talking about. That's why Pope Pius V, St. Pius V, said in Quo Primum that no one can ever forbid a priest, not even a religious superior, not a cardinal, not a bishop, not even a pope, can forbid someone from saying that.
And what does this have to do with Fatima, someone might ask? Well, recall what we said in the first episode of this series. Pius XII, the future Pius XII, speaking in 1931, said, I am worried by the Blessed Virgin's warnings to little Lucia of Fatima. The message of Fatima is a divine warning against the suicide of altering the faith in her theology, her liturgy, and her soul. And remember, we also noted the future Pope's prediction in 1931 that the day would come when people would enter their churches and they would not find the red sanctuary lamp.
And they would not find
the Blessed Sacrament would not be in the sanctuary.
Yes. They would say, where have they laid him? This is, and of course, and he says it's in the message of Fatima. Of course, where is it in the message of Fatima? I can tell you, it's in the third secret, the part they haven't released.
In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. Clearly, Our Lady was talking about what would happen to dogma outside the nation of Portugal. And I know, by the way, that when Pope Benedict was going to visit Portugal on his pilgrimage to Fatima, I forget which prelate it was. It was some high-ranking prelate of the Portuguese hierarchy. He said, well, it's really a good thing the Pope is coming to visit Fatima because, you know, Portugal has never really caught up with the Second Vatican Council.
Oh, well.
So we really need the Pope to come over here and get Portugal up to speed with the new church that followed the Second Vatican Council. So although you could say that Portugal has been subjected to the liberalizing trends of the recent decades, still there's something in Portugal that has never fundamentally been altered by this new orientation of the church, which is why, what is it, Father, 1/6 of the Portuguese
Yes,
population
yes.
every year continues to make pilgrimages to Fatima.
That's right. They go. I mean, when 70,000 people came, of course, for the miracle of the sun on October 13, 1917, and ever since they've been blessed with this miracle. And you know, even though it was suppressed by the government, suppressed by the clergy didn't want it because they were afraid of persecution from the Masonic government. But over time, the Our Lady's victory in Portugal has been going to the people directly, and they've responded. They called out the army, you know, on October 13, 1917, to prevent the people from seeing the miracle. But it was the army itself was converted. The captain is seen letting them go when he could see the miracle himself. I mean, this is so. In turn, yes, it's 1/6 for the last. I can't say for the last few years, but after the Second World War till the 1980s or 90s, 1/6, or about 2 million out of 12 million Portuguese go, whether on foot, by car, walking. The last part, a lot of them do on their knees, going to Fatima in honor of Our Lady of Fatima.
That would be equivalent to 50 million Americans.
Yes.
Visiting a Marian shrine every year.
Yes.
And that would be a pretty compelling sign that the faith had not been lost in America when
Yes.
50 million people go to a Marian shrine every year.
Yes.
And that's what we're still seeing in Portugal, where the dogma of the faith, in that sense, have been preserved in the people, even if the hierarchy is defecting everywhere, including in many places in Portugal.
Yeah.
Because we know what happened at the Hindu shrine, at the Capellina, when the former rector, Monsignor Guerra, invited Hindus to participate in a ritual.
Yeah, we can show that on our screen. It was
in the Fatima shrine.
Yeah, right where Our Lady appeared. Yes, and so this is why. So this is not. People shouldn't be surprised when we're talking about the party line and the false friends of Fatima. I mean, they've had false friends of Fatima in Fatima itself, making out. Well, the Fatima is a call to this ecumenical. No, Our Lady talked about preserving the dogma of the faith. You don't have to preserve the dogma of the faith of the Catholic Church by having these Hindus coming to a Catholic shrine and having Hindu worship in a Catholic church.
I should point out that Monsignor Guerra is the former rector of the Fatima Shrine. He's now his retirement was rather wisely accepted by the Pope.
Yes,
when he reached retirement age, and so he's no longer in charge of the Fatima Shrine. But we still have this problem of the party line in the church being rigorously imposed by the Vatican Secretary of State. But recently, in fact, during his pilgrimage to Fatima, Pope Benedict XVI pretty much negated the party line.
Yes, but in fact, the party line with regard to Fatima has been that Fatima is basically in the past. Fatima is a nice thing. If you want to believe it, if it helps you, that's good. We're not against that. But the request for the consecration, well, that's been done, even though it's been proven over and over again it's not been done. And the second thing is, well, the secret, this has all been released. And of course, you've proven in your books, as we've proven also in our TV programs, that it's not been all released. But this is the part. So the consecration is over, the secret's released, it's all in the past, so now it's just prayer and penance and prayer and penance. But Benedict actually contradicted that when he said, he who thinks, not he who says, he who thinks that the prophetic mission of Fatima is concluded in the past deceives himself.
Right. The Italian is si illuderebbe che pensasse che la missione profetica di Fatima sia conclusa. He deludes himself who thinks that the message of Fatima is concluded. And
the prophetic mission of Fatima.
The prophetic missions of Fatima is concluded. And I noted in the book, and this is again the Vatican Secretary of State at work, the Italian original and the Portuguese original both use a reflexive verb. He deceives himself.
Yes.
There's a deception involved.
In the translation in English?
But the English translation says, he is mistaken. Oh, it's just a mistake. No, it's a deception.
It's a self-deception.
Self-deception, and that was removed from the English translation. And another little example, when the Vatican published the vision which pertains to the third secret, and is part of the secret, without the words of the Virgin, it published the rest of the message of Fatima, the first two parts of the Great Secret. And in Sister Lucia's original handwritten text, Our Lady says, during the reign of Pius XI, you will see a strange light in the night sky which will signal the beginning of World War II. Well, the Vatican translates reign of Pius XI as pontificate of Pius XI. Changes the word the Mother of God used, reign, to pontificate. Why? Because the party line doesn't like kings.
It doesn't
Party line doesn't like queens of heaven.
The very fact that the Pope rules, and therefore and that everybody, including the bishops, have to obey him when he gives a command within his jurisdiction.
And this is the fundamental problem with this reorganization of the Vatican Curia. The Church has been converted from what should be a monarchy ruled by a monarch, just as the whole universe is a monarchy ruled by a monarch, into a parliamentary republic. We have the king who's a figurehead. He's not really a figurehead, but practically speaking, he's been made into one. He could end that with a stroke of a pen if he wished to. Then we have the prime minister, who's presiding over the daily affairs of the republic. And then we have the various departments called bishops' conferences. And they're all democratic bodies.
And they all report to the
Church
Secretary of
is
State.
totally democratized.
Except when it comes to Secretary of State wants to impose the party line against Fatima.
Yes.
Then it's not democratic at all.
Well, we should be talking, I guess, in our next segment about some of these false friends of Fatima besides the Vatican Secretary of State. Maybe we can do that in the next segment, Father.
I hope so. We must remember that the message of Our Lady Fatima is very important for our time. She told us, only I can help you. That is, only the Blessed Virgin Mary can help us. We must do it her way, and we will have peace. If we don't do it her way, we will have enslavement and war and the annihilation of nations and hunger, that is famine, and the persecution of the Holy Father and persecution of the Church. There's only one way out of this. It's Our Lady of Fatima's plan. We must obey it. But if it's hidden from us, if it's falsified by the false friends of Fatima, you don't get to know it. That's why this program is so important. God bless you. Remember to pray the Rosary every day.